I'm Kurt with Slick Rock Productions, and I put a video out on Portal Nation a little while ago about some steering problems, some cures that we have for that, and we have a few naysayers on there, so we're going to go step by step through this with some of the problems and some of the cures to fix it. So what we call oversteer is a big problem. What happens is when you get a +2 or a +1.5 A-arm, obviously it moves the A-arms forward and it puts your tire rod in on more of an angle. Most of those kits come with a bump stop that goes in your steering. They're plastic, they break out pretty easy. But what happens is, especially if you're going downhill, you turn into a rock or an obstacle, you push on the gas a little bit, it'll actually fold backwards because of the angle of the tie rod end. And once that folds backwards, it usually breaks one of these and takes out an axle almost every single time. So we've got a couple of tricks to avoid that, and we'll show you what those are. So one of those cures is a misalignment hind. Basically, you put it in like this, you put it in the factory location, and because the tie rod end is sticking back like it did with the factory geometry of the vehicle, it can't oversteer. So it can't overturn and collapse and go backwards on itself because it's sticking out a little bit farther. So something that we have done over the years that we've had some good success with is we've actually moved the hole over on the portal bracket. So you can weld a piece of steel on there, drill a hole in it. Most of the portal brackets they're coned in. We just drill straight holes in them. We use misalignments and kind of get away from the cone thing anyway. But what this does is, because it's back farther, it gives you more leverage on the steering and it makes your steering a lot easier. So this is a give and take if you're running a regular Heim on it. If you put a conventional Heim on it and you just move it back, you're going to lose steering throw. It makes it a lot easier to turn just due to leverage. The farther your leverage point is away from the ball joint, the easier it is to turn, but you're going to lose throw. The straighter this rod gets, the more throw you lose. So over the years in moving this back, we have sacrificed steering throw for strength. You can't oversteer when they're back here, so you're not damaging parts, but especially on a four-seater where you lose some throw, it's a lot harder to make tight corners. We've sacrificed that because moving it back here makes it about 20% easier to turn. So it's a lot easier on your steering and your components, and it's a lot easier to manipulate and drive, but you lose throw with a Heim joint. The reason you're losing throw, obviously the straightest point in between two lines is the shortest. Shortening up, you're gonna lose throw when it steers because it is designed to be on an angle this way. So what we've been doing is using a misalignment Heim backwards like this, and putting it into the outside hole. That gets you closer to geometry with the tie rod, so it actually lengthens the whole thing. And if you do the measurement on it and you put it in a factory location as opposed to an outside location with the misalignment Heim, you're gaining about between 1/8 and 1/4 of an inch more throw. Now that doesn't sound like a whole lot, but what you have to keep in mind is 1/8 or 1/4 inch here equals 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch depending on what size tire you're running. So obviously the bigger tire you're running, you get 1/4 inch more steering, you get a lot more throw out of it. That makes it easier so you don't lose as much steering, and your pressure point remains on the outside, the point of force, so it makes it easier to turn. So with this system here with the misalignment Heim backwards, it's easier to turn. You don't lose as much steering throw out of it, so that makes it a lot better, and it gets the factory geometry closer to it was factory, where you're not losing anything. Now we're running our holes about 1 1/8 inches from center point to center point, so that's a little bit less, or a little bit more. This is a 3/4 offset Heim, so we have a 1/2 inch difference. We run that 1/2 inch difference on the alignment, so we do that because we don't want to be able to oversteer, otherwise you're not fixing that problem. So the setup here is really kind of important. We've done a whole bunch of these. It does work for any naysayers out there. We've done the math 55 times. We've done this on a whole bunch of cars. This is a good solution if you're running a big tire car to save on some steering components and some problems. So what we were after here in moving that hole out was we want our tie rod angle to be back a little bit farther than factory so it can't oversteer. So as you look here with the misalignment, go in here and get a shot of this. Where that lines up and comes down, we are just on the back side being offset of that hole. That'll keep it, when it's at full turn, can't oversteer, so it can't fold backwards. So that gets us really close to back to factory geometry, but it's back just far enough that it won't allow it to oversteer. So what we gain out of being able to do this is because of the misalignment Heim, we can keep our tie rod in pretty close to the factory geometry, but we can move it back, we get more leverage out of it, it's easier to steer, it won't oversteer that way so you're not breaking anything. And like I said, it's about 20 or 30% easier to steer just moving that back 1.25 inches. Because like I said, the farther you get away from the ball joint, the more leverage you have on it, the easier it is. Now, a whole bunch of guys have argued with me that using a misalignment here does not change force. I agree, it does not change the force. The mounting point is still the same. What it does do is change the angle of the tie rod end. Like I said, the shortest distance in between 2 points is a straight line. If you run a regular Heim on it on an outside hole, you're going to lose a bunch of steering throw. In making this longer and putting the angle back forward, you reacquire some of that back. That's the point of the misalignment Heim, to get it back. Like I said, we're running these backwards from what they're made for. If you run it the other way, you don't have to weld a tab back here, you won't oversteer, but doing it this way, you get a little bit more leverage when you're steering, and it makes it a lot easier to turn big tires. So we talked about some ways to get some more leverage so your steering's a little easier. We talked about throw. We kind of talked about the outside, but that won't protect your steering rack. If you hit something hard, we all know this is what happens to steering racks. They bend, they're expensive, they suck to take in and out. We've obviously done a lot of them. Sandcraft steering stabilizers will take the blunt of that blow though. So if you hit something hard, a Sandcraft steering stabilizer is designed, as your rack moves, this moves with it. Your stabilizer moves with it. So you get the added strength of all this steel. So if you take a hard hit, this will keep this from looking like this.